In this video, I'm going to discuss how to write thesis, and it will cover step-by-step process to write the thesis in all disciplines or subjects, and it will cover the thesis from master's to PhD. I will guide you how to write thesis with low similarity index, and you might be aware of this terminology. The similarity index should be less than 20%, which can be determined by softwares like Turnitin. However, the similarity index may vary in certain special cases. And the thesis, of course, should be without plagiarism. And plagiarism comes in both ways, like in the thesis write-up as well as the ideas on the basis of which you have done your research. So basically, thesis addresses need for the project, that why did you do and what was the justification of the research, and how did you do that, and what was the ultimate outcome. So basically, thesis covers the whole aspects of the research you have done. Two broad categories of research are survey, observational or thematic research, and the other one is the experimental research, in which you perform experiment in the lab or in the field. That includes applied as well as basic research. So it depends on your subject and the interest area, that what kind of research you have done on which you want to write the thesis. But the basic uh, theme or basic principles of writing a thesis are very much similar. These are the general sections of the thesis and their order in which the thesis is presented. It contains title, abstract, introduction, literature review, materials and methods, results and discussion, summary, and literature cited. Although there may be some small variation in some of these, but these are the general sections. So you should follow the format given by your institution. The order in which thesis is written is different from the order in which thesis is presented. As in the last slide, that was the order in which the thesis is presented. But here is the order, the preferable order in which one should write the thesis, so that you get low similarity index and you also can write a high quality thesis. And it is recommended that the first chapter should be literature review when you start writing a thesis. And then you follow this order: materials and methods, results and discussion, and then introduction. Because literature review gives you an overview of the research that has already been done and the gap in the literature on the basis of which you have conducted your research. And methodology gives you an idea that what kind of methods have you used, and in results and discussion, of course, what kind of results did you achieve and how these are compared with the literature. And then comes the introduction, because the reviewer sees the introduction as a first chapter rather than literature review or any of these. Introduction contains the justification of the project and also contains the overall outcome of the project. So if you write introduction after these three chapters, it can be written in a better way. And then comes the summary, followed by the abstract, which summary is a longer version, abstract is shorter version of the summary. And then you give the title. Title is of course the same. You don't have to do anything with the title because it's the same as approved in your synopsis. And then the literature cited. One by one. So once again, this data table has a central role in writing the thesis as well as it was in the synopsis. And I have explained in my video on how to conceive a research idea and how to decide your title in about this data table, how to create this table. So briefly, you have abstracts, research papers, and review articles in the form of resource which you have collected. and then you have taken the salient points of all these and written in some table form, and then you have given the references here. So there is no exact number how much review articles and research paper, etc., are needed for any thesis to write, because it varies depending on the subject and the type of the research and the available data in the literature. But generally, for most of the topics, this may be the range that you should have at least some of the review articles and then research papers and a more number of abstracts available with you and organized in this data table. For writing the literature review, first thing is you make subheadings out of this data table. Now this data table will be helpful in writing up the review chapter. And based on this data, you have to make the subheadings by yourself, that which one is important based on your topic, and what are the important headings that you need to discuss, so that the reviewer or the reader can see what is the actually was the gap due to which, and what was the importance of this project that you conducted. Review of literature is conceptual writing in your own words. As I mentioned, that you have to make your own headings from the data table, and when you make these headings, then you organize these, which heading you want to add first, and you can give numbering to these headings like 2.1, 2.2, and so on. This 2 is because in most of the cases this literature review is the second chapter after introduction when you present your thesis. Write in your own words in the story form. So for example, if you want to write something on this first heading, you use the data table and take out all the relevant resources, including abstracts, research papers, and review articles that are related to the keywords relating to this heading. And you start writing in your own words in the story form, and by giving the work of the other researchers and give their references. So you discuss their results, and it is not only enough that you just discuss their results. Rather, you have to give your conclusion or interpretation out of these results after every heading. And then you may also add subheadings. Like for example, if you are writing a thesis on coronavirus, research on coronavirus, so you may give the outbreak of coronavirus in the world. That may be your main heading, and you write down different using different abstracts and research papers and review articles, you write in the story form. Then you may add subheading like coronavirus in Asian countries. This may be like 2.1.1, and then 2.1.2 may be coronavirus in Europe, and so on. And then your next heading may be vaccines available for the coronavirus. So this is just one example, so you can apply it to any kind of research, to any subject, from social sciences, or even for the art subjects as well. Do not give data in the text. This is very important, that for example, for coronavirus in different coronavirus outbreak in different parts of the world, you should not write that data like this much percentage in this country is present, and in that country this much percentage is found, and so on. You do not write give the data in the text. You just discuss the trends in the text, and the data should be given in the form of tables, figures, and charts. And it's better to make your own tables from different research papers. These are the best ones. Try making your own figures and charts. And you must mention the table number and figure number in the text before that table, figure, or chart is given. Like if you are writing the text in the first paragraph and you want to give a table or a figure or a chart, then you should mention figure, for example, 2.1 in the text, and then you give that figure maybe on the next page or in the same page after you mention first time in the text. It's very important to conclude every heading and subheading as I mentioned earlier, but you should also give a final paragraph of the review of literature giving gap in literature on the basis of which you actually conducted this research. So you have to mention that gap. This is one example of the table in some of the theses, and this is the title of the table. It's better to write this here rather than in this at this place. And here you can see someone has made this table from different references by studying different research papers or review articles, and they got this data from there. So it's an example of a very good table that you make this table by yourself by studying so many references, and there may be more present in this table. Similarly, for figures, you can give the trends in the form of bar diagrams, or in the form of regression line, or in the form of this bar chart, or trend lines, or the pie chart. Or you can also give this kind of figure here. So if you are making these figures or tables by yourself, it's better, and you give the references relevant to that from where you took this data. But if you are taking the whole figure or the table from somewhere, then you must write down the source from which you have taken that particular table or figure, that from where you have taken that. I will discuss more about figures and tables when I will discuss the results part. But here I'm going to discuss about the materials and methods. You once again use the data table for your materials and methods for references, and you must write it in the past tense with references, because you are giving the methodology which you have already done in research. So you should give where the study was performed, and you can give the numbering like 3.1, or there's further subheadings, and then 3.2, what sampling method did you use, the number of samples, type and sources of samples, and how were samples collected. So this is also very important. Even for the research for social sciences, for survey type research, you have to give the sample methodology. That how did you collect those samples, and what was your sampling method references. Now, to write down the materials and methods, you should make further subsections according to objectives of the study and hypotheses made in your synopsis. You should write down the methodology in concise form, but it should be comprehensive enough that if someone wants to repeat that experiment, by using your reference, he should be able to collect all the relevant information from your thesis as well as from the other research papers from the references you have given. So, and you should also write in paragraph form rather than in point form 1, 2, 3 or so on. You should write small paragraphs, and you don't have to write protocols. You just give brief methodology, but it should be little more than in research papers. In research papers, it is much more concise form, so you can elaborate a little in your thesis, but you don't have to write everything because you are giving the reference. And you should write in the past tense because you already have done that. If you want to give recipes of something like from some solutions, or you want to give detailed protocols, you may attach in annexures. Similarly, if there are some questionnaires, that may also be attached as annexures to the thesis. In methodology, you should also mention the essential requirements that you completed for your project, like any types of approvals that you have taken from ethical review committee or the institutional biosafety committee. For the research on animals where human beings are involved, or in case of any other ethical issues involved, then you have to take permission from ethical review committee at the synopsis level. And if you're working on some GMOs or some transgenic animals or plants, so you have to take permission from institutional biosafety committee at the time of synopsis, and you should mention it in the materials and methods chapter. Similarly, you should write down how you analyzed your data and which statistical model or was used and what kind of analysis those were applied to analyze the data. So you give this with the along with the references, that how did you perform all this, and if you have analyzed it from somewhere, you should give the name of the company from where you get this data analyzed. In methodology, you may have to write units and abbreviations. So always use standard units and abbreviations rather than making your own abbreviations. Similarly, for example, in SI system, milligram, gram, K is small for kilo. Similarly, L is capital for liter, whether it is milliliter, liter, nanoliter, and so on. And similarly, this molar is small cap. It is neither small nor it is capital. It is small cap. Similarly, you always give space between number and unit except for percent. Like here, there is a space, one space, but in percent there is no space. Similarly, you should italicize the scientific names of plants, animals, and microorganisms. So these are just guidelines that how you should use or you should write down the standard units and abbreviations. Of course, there is a long list of these such kind of abbreviations and units which cannot be given here, but this is an overall idea that how you should write these abbreviations and the standard units. Now comes the most important, you may say, chapter of the thesis, which you are writing after writing down the review of literature and methodology. It is the results and discussion chapter, because here you are going to give the results of your research. This may be, you may split this in two chapters, one of results, another one of the discussion. But you should do this if some model, etc., is presented out of your results. If the results are just quite straightforward or you don't have much data, then it's better not to go for separate chapters. In that case, you should go for a single chapter in results and discussion if your data is simple and you are not going to present any model, etc., out of your data. As I mentioned, that data table is very important for writing of the synopsis and for the thesis. Similarly, to write down the results chapter, research notebook is highly important. And what is that research notebook? It means it is a notebook in which you write down date-wise every activity you were doing while you were conducting your research. And remember that practical notebook is very different than the research notebook. In practical notebook, you are performing the experiment for which you know the results, and it is just for your training purpose, and you make one side this type of like you are giving your observations and so on, and other side you write it down like that. But for the research notebook, you give the data, date-wise data, and you give the plan of work for every experiment, immediate plan of work. And you also write down the discussions with your supervisor and colleagues with reference to this plan of work or experiment you want to do. And then you write down how did you perform. Do not write protocol in details, they are already available separately, but mention if there is any change in the protocol in your research notebook. You don't fill it up with the protocols which are already available. And you should also give results with interpretation under different dates, that what were your results for that experiment and what was your interpretation. You should give the brief interpretation without giving a references. Here you don't need to give reference from the literature. These are your own results and you are giving. However, you can give one or two references if the interpretation is specific. And you should also make the research notebook not only for science subjects but also for social sciences and for the arts subjects. All sides of research needs this research notebook, and these research notebooks are taken by the ownership is of the lab or the supervisor where you are working. And you should also make a copy of this research notebook and put it on some safe place separate than the original research notebook, because this is very important document, not only to write up your thesis but also to write down the research papers later on. So it should be kept like it's a lifelong thing, that this research notebook. Otherwise, you are going to, if you lose the research notebook, you will waste all of your time and energies which you have given for so much period, and you spend so much money on that as well. Now, to write the results, whether you are writing in a single chapter or you are writing two separate chapters, the results needs data analysis first. So you have to analyze the data and then organize the data in tables and figures, and then divide the data in different headings and subheadings. Now these headings and subheadings are different than the headings and subheadings those were given in the review chapter. In the review chapter, those headings and subheadings were according to the data table, which and that was made out of the research by other people. But here you are making these headings and subheadings based on your own research, and of course you will write in past tense mostly. This first paragraph should give background of the project study. You don't start bluntly from your results. It's better to give a short paragraph, maybe half page or so, about, if someone reads directly to your results, he should know that what was your objective. And the results should be written in story form, as I mentioned earlier, that you should write it down just like you're telling stories to someone. And you should also explain the methods used while you are giving your results. Like if you want to give research you have conducted on distribution of corona virus, then you should write down which methodology did you use. Here you are not giving detailed methodology as you have given in the materials and methods chapter. Here you are giving just overview of the methodology you have used and what were the significance of that methodology, and what was, if there are any drawbacks in that methodology, you should mention here. because in materials and methods you do not mention any such thing. There you only mention what methodology did you use. Here you actually you are explaining that methodology to so that you can emphasize your significance of your results. Just like as I mentioned in the review chapter that you should not give data in the text form, rather you should discuss trends in the text, and you should give data in tables, figures and charts. Similar for your results, that you should also give the data in the form of tables, figures and charts, and you explain the trends in that data in the results. So first you should mention the table, figure and chart in the text, and then you give that particular table, figure or chart. And you must mention table number and figure number in the text before the table, figure or chart is given. However, for very few data points, like if you just have 2 or 3 data points, you don't need to make table or figure for these few data points. You can give those if few data points in the text. So if the data points are more, which usually is the case, you should make table or some chart, and then you explain that in the. So how to give titles of the tables and figures and charts. These titles of tables should be given at the top of the table, and titles of the figures and charts should be given below the figure or the chart. And another important thing is titles of the figures, charts and tables should be self-explanatory. You don't have to read the whole text to understand that particular table or figure. Similarly, legends of the figures and charts and tables should be given in detail to make those tables and figures independent of the text as well. So these are examples that have already been given, that you can here this time these data points are yours, but in the review chapter you give the data points for other researchers. So this is the main difference. You give the table number and its title on top of the table. You should also mention if there is some standard deviation in the data, and you can also mention the statistical analysis if it is done, like it is significant or non-significant. And you may give in the legend, like here, key is given to understand that table. So you don't have to go to the text for every detail. You can understand from here. Similarly, this is another example of the table. This is a simpler table as compared to this, but this also contains the table number and the title above the table. And for figures, you can give like that, and you should give a detailed title of the figure, and you may also give a detailed legend of some figure you are giving. So as you can see here, this is a long legend. I didn't show it clearly because it doesn't matter. Because here just I am making my point that you should give the title of the figure below the figure, and you should give detailed legend so that it can be self-explanatory. And this should also be, this is also self-explanatory. However, here you may need to read the text before you can understand, so you can give further legend to this figure as well. If you're writing the results and discussion as a joint chapter, you should first give your results in each heading and explain those a little bit, like in the form of a table, figure, and charts after analyzing the data. Then you discuss with reference to literature review from the data table. It is not enough just to saying that these results are in accordance with those researchers or these are against those results. you should give your conclusion with justification under every heading. So meaning you first give your results, then discuss with reference to the literature, and then give your final conclusion or justification, what you are saying or what results have you gotten under each heading. And if you are writing separate chapters, you first write down the results chapter and then the discussion chapter. It is usually you should do it if you are presenting some model, etc. In that case, of course, the results are discussed in a chapter separately, and then discussion is made under different headings in next chapter. As I mentioned here, that it's not enough to mention that these results are after that or these results are not according to those researchers. You should give a concrete conclusion with justification under every heading. And finally, after the whole chapter, you should conclude and give overall justification of your conclusion, that on which basis did you reach to that conclusion. Now comes the introduction chapter. This introduction chapter basically shows the need for the project. And you know you have written almost all other chapters, and you are writing this chapter after those because now you have your picture is clear that what kind of methodology did you use, and what were your results, and what was the gap in the literature. So you once again you have to use this data table, and this introduction may be of 3 to 5 pages. Even for PhD thesis you don't need a long introduction, because such other things may be given in the literature review or review of literature chapter. And so 3 to 5 pages of 12 font size, 1.5 line spacing. What are the important components of introduction? You may write first paragraph on the background to the project. Here do not give any history. Write to the point. Like if you are writing about research on, for example, coronavirus pandemic, so you don't have to write down details of the viruses, neither you write down detail of different experiments did you use, or you don't have to write down details of the vaccines, for example, of the virus. You just go to the problem statement that this coronavirus is a pandemic, and what kind of disaster it was bringing. So using the references, writing in your own words, you give this problem statement. And then you give the possible solutions with references from the literature, that what type of solutions that can be used. For example, vaccines can be produced, or some sort of temperature can be used, or what precautions can be used. So all possible solutions. Then in the next paragraph you give your solution, that how would you do research to counter that problem you have given here. There are multiple solutions. What is your solution to the problem? And you give justification statement that why you are selecting this particular solution, and you give the hypothesis that was given in the synopsis based on this, that what was your hypothesis which you were testing in the research. You should, in the next couple of paragraphs, you have to write down how did you execute the project. Here you don't have to write down detailed methodology, but you give an overview, brief overview, that how did you execute that particular project or study. And then you give objectives of your study that were given in your synopsis. So you give exactly those objectives that were finalized in your synopsis. So you may see my video on how to write synopsis if you want more discussion on it. And then you give ultimate outcome of your research in one paragraph. You write down what achievements did you get out of this research uh, or your study. So you have to mention that. After title, the reviewer or reader usually reads abstract to see what you have done or how you have done. So your abstract should be from 250 to 300 words. First two lines, they should contain the problem statement and need for the project. Then next two lines, they should give, uh, you should give that what did you do, and then how did you execute the project. Just brief couple of or 3 to 4 lines, the methodology here. And then finally, what was ultimate outcome of the project. So basically, abstract is précis of all the chapters you have written so far. Summary is a larger version of the abstract, and it is composed of 1 to 1.5 pages of A4 size with 1.5 line spacing. And the first paragraph should be about problem statement and need for the project or the study. And then you write out down in the form of paragraphs like what did you do, how did you execute the project or your study, and what was the ultimate outcome you can give in the last paragraph. So you finish it up to 1 to 1.5 pages at the most. Title of the thesis should be concise and comprehensive, and you should avoid many of these things from this title, but I'm not going into discussing in detail over here because I have given it this in my video on how to write synopsis. Moreover, you don't have any cushion to change your title in thesis, which is already approved during your synopsis approval. So this title you give here, just the approved title, unless you have made some drastic changes in the title. In that case, you have to redefine your synopsis for that particular title. Acknowledgement is an important component of the thesis. You should write acknowledgement from 1 to 1.5 pages, and you should acknowledge your supervisor, your supervisory committee, your institution or lab in which research was conducted, or if field research, you may mention that. Similarly, funding agency is also very important, who has given funding for your project, and you should also write down the names of the persons uh, that how did they help in your project, but it should be a significant type of help. And similarly, you may also write about data analyst or statistician uh, when you write down this acknowledgement. Finally, you can also give names of the family and friends for moral support if there was any, but some people start writing about their family and friends and they write it down a 1 or 2 pages on it, which is very lengthy, and no need to write so much about your family and friends. Rather, you should give a it's better if you just curtail it into 1 page. So you give uh, you acknowledge the persons who really helped you out in your research. You have to give references throughout your text, and you also have to give literature cited at the end of the thesis. So you may write down manually, but it's a lot of work that you are putting in dots, comma, full stop, and everything. So now there are certain softwares which are available, like EndNote, which is a licensed software, and Mendeley, which is freeware up to certain extent. So you may use. There are many more softwares that help you to write down the references and literature cited I personally like this EndNote because it has you can create libraries in this, and then you can use it offline. However, choice is yours, but it is mandatory that you follow the pattern recommended by your institution, that it is an APS style or what style it is, and you should use any of the softwares rather than going for the manual addition of the references. Finally, you organize your thesis like in this order in which you have to present it, and similarly you have to add certain other documents like copyright statement, acknowledgement, as I mentioned. Then there are some cover pages and signature pages, and you should also add a comprehensive list of contents with the page numbering and sections in your thesis. Similarly, you should also give a separate list of tables and separate list of figures and charts. Uh, and you may also give some protocols or some other important material in appendices. And finally, you submit it for approval. So with this, I end my lecture here. I hope now you can write down a good thesis with low similarity index and without any plagiarism, and a quality thesis you may write by following these steps. Thank you very much.